most dangerous enemy in your life isn't outside you. It's the part of you that keeps surrendering to fear, comfort, approval, and distraction. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but every morning he fought a more important battle, the battle to master himself. Today, I'll give you 11 Stoic rules that can make you unconquerable. And Rule 11 may change everything. Listen closely, my friends. There was once a man sitting alone in a cold military tent on the German frontier, surrounded by war, plague, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of command. Millions of lives depended on his decisions. Empires shook when he spoke. And yet, every morning before the world demanded anything from him, he picked up a stylus and wrote to himself. Not for history. Not for legacy. Not for admiration. He wrote to survive. He wrote so he would not forget who he was while everything outside him tried to turn him into someone else. That man was Marcus Aurelius. And the words he scratched in private became one of the greatest philosophies of self-mastery ever handed down to us. He was not writing to impress you. He was fighting something far more intimate than war. He was fighting the pull of comfort, the hunger for approval, the seduction of fear, the same pull you feel right now. And here is what he learned, what the Stoics learned across centuries of philosophy forged in slavery, exile, grief, war, humiliation, and loss. The man who conquers himself becomes unconquerable. Today, I'm going to give you 11 rules. Not motivational fluff, not polished slogans, not empty quotes for a wall. These are principles so old and so true that they outlived empires, survived the burning of libraries, and endured the collapse of entire civilizations. And if you actually apply them, they will change the way you move through this world. Stay with me until the end, because Rule 11 is the one that will hit hardest. It is the rule most people spend their whole lives avoiding, and it is the only one that can set you fully free. Let's begin. Rule 1. Control the controllable, or be controlled by everything. In the first century AD, a slave sat in chains in Rome. His name was Epictetus. His master, Epaphroditus, was cruel, petty, and delighted in the suffering of others. One day, just to display his power, he began twisting Epictetus's leg slowly and deliberately. Epictetus looked at him calmly and said, "You are going to break it." His master twisted harder. The bone snapped, and Epictetus said quietly, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" No screaming, no pleading, no collapse. Not because he felt no pain. He did, but because he had already made a decision that no one could take from him. He had divided the universe into two categories: what is within your control, and what is not. In his Enchiridion he wrote, "Some things are in our control, and others are not. In our control, our judgments, our choices, our desires, our aversions, our actions. Not in our control, our body, our reputation, our possessions, other people's decisions, and the outcome of events." Read that carefully. Your opinions, yours, your choices, yours, your response to pain, yours, your reputation, not yours. Other people's approval, not yours. The final result of your effort, never fully yours. And here is the tragedy of how most people live. They spend nearly all their energy trying to control what was never theirs to govern. Think about the last week of your life. How much time did you spend worrying about what someone thought of you? How much time replaying a conversation? How much time waiting for a text, interpreting a tone, monitoring someone's behavior, hoping for approval that never came? All of that energy went into the wrong column. There is an old story from history that captures this perfectly. In 480 BC, a messenger came to Leonidas, king of Sparta, carrying a demand from Xerxes, the Persian emperor, whose army was so vast that ancient writers said their campfires lit up the night sky. The message was simple: surrender your weapons. Leonidas replied with 2 words: come and take them. He could not control the size of Xerxes' army. He could not control whether reinforcements would come. He could not control whether he would live or die. But he could control his response, his honor, his posture, his refusal to be diminished. That is Stoicism. Not passivity, not numbness, not resignation. Clarity. Clarity about where your power actually lives, and the discipline to pour yourself into that place alone. So here is the practice. Every morning, before you touch your phone, divide your concerns into 2 columns. Column A, what I can influence by action today. Column B, what will happen whether I worry or not. Give your strength to column A. Release column B, not out of defeat, but out of self-respect. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The moment you stop merely admiring that idea and start embodying it, you become something rare. Not invulnerable, but untouchable in a deeper sense. Because pain may still reach you, but it no longer gets to rule you. Rule 2. Embrace the obstacle. In the winter of 1812. Napoleon marched into Russia with over 500,000 men. It was the greatest army Europe had ever seen. He expected one final decisive victory. Instead, the Russians retreated. They burned their own crops. They abandoned their own cities. When Napoleon reached Moscow, the prize, the symbol, the goal around which he had organized everything, he found it empty and burning. And he waited for surrender. It never came. The obstacle was not the enemy army. The obstacle was emptiness. Cold, silence, the absence of the victory he had imagined. And Napoleon, who had spent his life moving through resistance, did not know how to move through that. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This is one of the hardest Stoic ideas to accept, and one of the most transformative. The obstacle is not blocking your path. The obstacle is your path. Thomas Edison tested more than 1,000 materials before finding the right filament for the light bulb. When a journalist asked how it felt to fail so many times, he answered, "I have not failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that do not work." Demosthenes, the greatest orator of Athens, was born with a severe speech impediment. In a culture where speech meant power, that could have ended his life before it began. Instead, he trained with pebbles in his mouth. He spoke over crashing waves. He locked himself away and practiced until his weakness became the very furnace in which his greatness was forged. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery and then returned again and again to guide others to freedom. 19 times. She did not wait for conditions to become easy. The danger was not outside the mission. The danger was the mission. And that is exactly where her courage took form. So ask yourself, what is the obstacle in your life right now? The rejection? The failure? The illness? The closed door? The breakup? The uncertainty? Do not insult yourself by pretending it is secretly a gift. That is not Stoicism. Stoicism asks something more honest. What information is hidden inside this difficulty that comfort never could have taught me? Because the person who runs from difficulty finds difficulty everywhere. But the person who learns to move through difficulty eventually becomes someone it cannot stop. Here is the practice. The next time something blocks you, ask, "What is this teaching me that ease never would?" Then write the answer down. Read it back. Act on it. That is not optimism. That is alchemy. Rule 3. Kill the invisible audience. Let me tell you about someone named Hannah. She is not famous. She will never be in a history book. But her story belongs to almost everyone alive right now. Hannah was brilliant. She had real ideas, the kind that change rooms when spoken aloud. But she barely showed them. Why? Because somewhere around adolescence, she entered into a silent agreement with an invisible jury. She would not speak unless she was sure her words would land well. She would not risk dressing too boldly. She would not try something she might fail at in public. Little by little, she edited herself into acceptability. By 35, her life looked fine from the outside, but it no longer felt like hers. She could not remember the last time she had said what she truly believed in a room full of people. She could not remember the last major decision she made for herself instead of for how it would appear. She had spent decades performing for an audience that was never really watching. Modern psychology calls this the spotlight effect, our tendency to wildly overestimate how much other people notice, judge, and remember us. The Stoics understood this long before the studies. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says, or does, or thinks." Think about that. How much of your peace is being spent on the imaginary court of people who are too absorbed in themselves to study you the way you fear they do? Epictetus said something even sharper. When told that someone was speaking badly of him, he advised, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, 'He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned only these.'" That is freedom, not arrogance. Freedom. The freedom of a person who refuses to let strangers become the judges of his worth. And here is the deeper truth. The invisible audience is not really made of other people. It is made of your own fear wearing their faces. The voice that says they'll think you're ridiculous is often not their voice at all. It is an old voice inside you, a wounded voice, a child's voice, a voice that once confused approval with safety. And every time you obey it, you abandon yourself a little more. Every edited opinion, every muted instinct, every decision made for appearance rather than truth. These things do not just shrink your life, they train you to disappear from it. So here is the practice. This week, do one thing entirely for yourself. Not for your image, not for your family's script, not for the feed, not for applause. Wear what you actually want. Say what you actually think. Begin the project you care about enough to fear. Let the audience stay invisible. Because it already is. You are the only person who will witness your whole life from beginning to end. Live in a way that lets you respect that witness. Rule 4. Memento mori, remember you will die. When a Roman general returned victorious from war, he was sometimes granted a triumph, one of the grandest ceremonies in the ancient world. Crowds filled the streets. Flowers were thrown. The city roared. The general rode in a chariot dressed almost like a god, and behind him stood a slave whose only task was to whisper into his ear, "Memento mori." Remember you will die. At the very height of glory, a whisper, "This ends. You are mortal. Remember what matters." This was not morbidity. It was clarity. Seneca wrote, "We are not given a short life, but we make it short." And then he drove the knife deeper. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Think about your last Tuesday, not the romantic version, the real one. Where did your attention go? What did you postpone? What conversation did you avoid? What truth did you delay? What work did you keep promising yourself you would begin later? Now ask the only question that matters. If that day had been your last, what would you have done differently? Most people do not answer with fantasies of luxury. They answer with simple, devastating honesty. I would have called my father. I would have written the first page. I would have said what I really felt. I would have stopped pretending I was fine. That is why mortality matters. Not because it should terrify you, but because it reveals your priorities with brutal precision. The Stoics used negative visualization for this reason. They imagined loss not to sink into despair, but to sharpen gratitude and strip away numbness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that everything he loved was temporary, not to make himself cold, to make himself present. So here is the practice. Before sleep, ask yourself, did I live today as if my life were real or as if I had an unlimited supply of tomorrows? Let the answer disturb you. That disturbance is useful. It is the beginning of honesty. Rule 5. Stop telling the story. Face the truth. In 399 BC, Socrates stood trial for his life. He was accused of corrupting the youth and impiety. His friends had options ready. He could likely have escaped. He could have softened his language. He could have performed remorse. He refused. And in the end, he chose death over living falsely. Why? Because he understood something most people spend their whole lives avoiding. The story you tell about your life is not your life. It is your defense of your life. And sometimes that defense is the very thing preventing change. Every human being carries a narrative, a story about why they are the way they are, why love failed, why success hasn't come, why trust is difficult, why they can't begin. Some of these stories contain real pain, real betrayal, real injustice. But the moment you protect the story more fiercely than you examine it, it stops being truth and becomes identity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." Think about the sentences you repeat to yourself. I can't trust people. I'm just not that kind of person. People always overlook me. I missed my chance. Maybe some part of those stories is true, but maybe they are also shields. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lost everything in a shipwreck. He later said, "I made a prosperous voyage when I suffered shipwreck." He did not deny the loss. He reframed the meaning. That is the difference. Not falsifying pain, not romanticizing suffering, but refusing to let one interpretation become your prison. So here is the practice. Take one story you have been telling about your life. Write it down exactly as you usually tell it. Then write it again from the perspective of someone who loves you but refuses to flatter you. Then write it a third time from the perspective of someone completely neutral. Which version feels truest? And what would you have to do if you stopped hiding behind the first one? The examined life is rarely comfortable, but it is the only life in which change becomes possible. Rule 6. Build unshakable inner strength. Marcus Aurelius ruled during plague, war, political betrayal, economic strain, and private grief. Children of his died. Armies collapsed. Friends disappointed him. The empire itself trembled. And still, morning and night, he wrote. Not to the world, to himself. He held himself to a standard that had nothing to do with reputation and everything to do with character. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. And elsewhere, never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. That is what strength looks like. Not swagger, not emotional suppression, not performance. Real strength is the private discipline of returning to your values when life gives you every excuse to abandon them. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the fortress within, not made of stone, made of principle. It is built every time you choose truth over convenience, every time you keep your word when breaking it would be easier, every time you face what scares you instead of pretending it can wait. James Stockdale, a prisoner of war in Vietnam for over 7 years, survived torture and isolation in part because he had internalized Stoic thought. He later described the paradox of survival. You must face brutal reality without surrendering your faith and meaning. That is inner strength. Not denial, not fantasy, not collapse. A deep structure that holds. So here is the practice. Write down your 3 non-negotiable values. Not the ones that sound impressive. The ones that, when violated, leave you ashamed of yourself no matter what you gained. Then ask at the end of each day, did I live in alignment with these today, or did I betray them for comfort, approval, or fear? That is how the citadel is built. Quietly, repeatedly, brick by brick. Rule 7. Embrace solitude as power during the Black Death. When cities collapsed into panic and death seemed to stand in every street, some fled not merely to escape, but to think, to be still, to listen, to process what catastrophe reveals. Solitude has always been misunderstood, Most people confuse it with loneliness. They are not the same. Loneliness is the pain of disconnection. Solitude is chosen presence with yourself. One wounds, the other heals. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Men seek retreats for themselves, but nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Think about how rare that has become. A world of constant noise, constant scrolling, constant stimulation. The moment silence appears, most people rush to cover it. Phone, music, podcast, notification, scroll, anything but meeting themselves. Pascal wrote that much of humanity's trouble comes from the inability to sit quietly alone in a room. The Stoics would have agreed. Because solitude is where illusion begins to weaken. It is where you hear the voice beneath performance. It is where your actual thinking returns. Musonius Rufus taught that comfort can weaken a person if he becomes dependent on it. A man who cannot be alone with himself without distraction cannot be trusted with difficulty. So here is the practice. For 1 hour a day, remove input. No phone, no music, no podcast, no conversation. Walk, sit, write, think. At first it may feel uncomfortable. Good, that discomfort is not a sign to escape. It is the doorway. Go through it. The voice waiting on the other side may be the most important one in your life. Rule 8. Your greatest enemy is inside you. Alexander the Great conquered nearly the entire known world before the age of 33. He defeated kings, crushed armies, shattered empires. And yet, the deeper reading of his life is tragic. He conquered everything outside himself and left the interior kingdom almost untouched. He became increasingly impulsive, paranoid, intoxicated by power, unable to tolerate contradiction. He could defeat nations, but not his own appetites. That is why the Stoics were obsessed with internal enemies, not because they were moralistic, because they were practical. Your real enemy is often not a rival, not a critic, not bad luck. It is the part of you that keeps sabotaging what matters. The need to be right, the need to be comfortable, the need to be admired, the habit of postponement, the anger that belongs to an older wound, the self-deception that disguises fear as logic. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself with startling honesty. He called out his own vanity, impatience, indulgence, and weakness. He did not preserve a flattering self-image. He trained himself through scrutiny. Because what you refuse to name, you cannot master. So here is the practice. Take 30 minutes this week and write down your recurring self-sabotaging patterns. Not your worst mistakes, your patterns. What do you do when things get hard? What do you always avoid when it matters most? What lie do you repeat to protect your comfort? Name it clearly. The enemy hidden in shadow rules you. The enemy dragged into the light begins to weaken. Rule 9. Amor Fati, love. What is when Nero ordered Seneca to die? Seneca did not collapse into panic. He had spent a lifetime preparing for the fact that life would eventually demand something final from him. And when the moment came, he chose composure. That is the spirit of Amor Fati, love of fate, not mere endurance, not forced positivity. To love fate does not mean approving of every event. It means refusing to waste your life wishing reality were something other than what it is. Because what is however painful, however inconvenient, however unfair, is the material of your life. And if you spend all your strength arguing with the fact that it exists, you rob yourself of the strength needed to work with it. Viktor Frankl saw this at the darkest edge of human experience. In the concentration camps, he observed that the final freedom remained, the freedom to choose one's attitude, one's orientation, one's inner posture. That is not small, that is everything. So ask yourself, what circumstance in your life are you still resisting as if resistance alone might erase it? A loss? A limitation? A truth about yourself? A season you didn't choose. Now ask, What would change if I stopped spending my life fighting the fact that this is here and used that energy to respond to it well? That is Amor Fati, not romanticizing pain, but no longer bleeding strength into denial. Rule 10. Distinguish love from need. Rumi met Shams of Tabriz, and his life split open. Before Shams, he was already respected, a scholar, a teacher, a man of structure and knowledge. Then Shams entered his life like fire, and what followed was transformation. Rumi stopped merely explaining the sacred and began living inside it. He wrote poetry of astonishing beauty, grief, and surrender. And when Shams disappeared, Rumi was devastated. But his love did not die with the loss. It deepened. Because what he loved was not just possession. It was awakening. This is where Stoic thought and spiritual insight meet. Most of what people call love is actually need. The need not to be alone. The need to be chosen. The need to be reflected back to yourself in a way you can bear. These needs are human, but they are not the same as love. Epictetus taught that we should not cling to people as if they were ours to keep forever. That does not make love colder. It makes it truer. Real love is grateful without being possessive, tender without being controlling, deep without being dependent. And most importantly, it wants what is truly good for the other person, not merely what is comforting for you. That may mean telling the truth. That may mean releasing someone. That may mean allowing change you did not ask for. And this applies to yourself as well. Not self-obsession, not narcissism, not endless self-improvement as another performance, but patient, honest, steady care for the person you actually are. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together. But do so with all your heart." All your heart. Not halfway. Not transactionally. Not with a fist closed in fear. That is love. Rule 11. Choose yourself. This is the hardest rule, not because it is complicated, because it is simple. And simple truths are the ones people can avoid the longest. Here it is. You have to decide. Not someday. Not when conditions improve. Not when you finally feel ready. Now, you have to decide to live your own life. Cato the Younger lived during the collapse of the Roman Republic. Around him, men compromised. They adjusted their values to fit power. They made peace with corruption because it was safer, smarter, more adaptive. Cato refused. Not because he was rigid, because he was clear. He would not become someone else just because the world rewarded someone else. And that is the question now standing in front of you. Are you living as the person you actually want to be? Or are you living as the person other people's fears, expectations, and demands have shaped? Most people will not answer that honestly. Because an honest answer creates obligation. If you admit the life isn't yours, then you must act. And action brings risk. People may not approve. Some may leave. You may fail publicly. You may lose the false life before the real one fully forms. That is the price. But the greater price is staying divided against yourself for another decade. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Begin at once to live, not later, at once." That is what every rule has been pointing toward. Rule 1 showed you where your power is. Rule 2 showed you that difficulty is part of the path. Rule 3 stripped away the audience. Rule 4 gave you death as a compass. Rule 5 asked you to face your stories. Rule 6 built the inner citadel. Rule 7 reclaimed solitude. Rule 8 named the true enemy. Rule 9 taught you to work with reality. Rule 10 purified love. And Rule 11 asks for the only thing the Stoics could never do for you: the decision. Marcus Aurelius could write. Seneca could advise. Epictetus could teach. Cato could embody it. But none of them could choose for you. That choice has always been yours. It is still yours now. Take it.